They lowered the stern ramp, and as my luck would have it, it was April Fool's Day. The ramp was sitting on the edge of a shell hole. I went down. I went into that hole, and I thought I was a goner. A quote from Tony Panataro, a soldier deployed on Okinawa during the first days of the battle. The Battle of Okinawa, otherwise known as Operation Iceberg, was a part of the United States' strategy of island hopping during the Pacific Theater in the attempt to attack the Japanese homeland. Okinawa was the last leg in the assault up to the Japanese homeland. The island was going to be used for the airstrips to be able to make the air raids on Japan and eventually to drop the atomic bombs. Although when the American forces landed on the beach, it was calm, almost tranquil. They had no idea the kind of hell they would have to endure in the almost 3 months they would spend on that island. In the 87 days on Okinawa, more than 70,000 American soldiers lost their lives in battle. And although this battle is considered the turning point of the war in the Pacific for many, oddly enough, the Japanese military's goal wasn't to win this battle, but to delay the Allied invasion so that they could reinforce the home islands in preparation for an invasion and to weaken the Allied forces' morale through exhaustion by attrition. As luck would have it, the Japanese military would send their 9th Division, which was their strongest division on the island, to Formosa, with the idea that the Allies were more likely to invade that island. Under the leadership of Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, the Japanese 32nd Army was left to defend the island from the Allied invasion. This army would consist of about 75,000 Japanese soldiers and the rest Okinawans. This move by the Japanese military forced their leaders on Okinawa to devise tactics to hold off the Americans as they advanced on the island. They would abandon about 3/4 of the northern end of the island, leaving the airstrips vulnerable, and would set up defensive lines at the southern end of the island. The greatest advantage that the Japanese had over the Americans was that this island had been used as an artillery training ground, which would provide them with extremely precise and deadly bombardments. When the Americans first landed on the beach, they found themselves facing little to no resistance, and as the days went on, the American troops realized that they would not be hit with offensive strikes from the Japanese, rather, that as they pushed up day by day, they would face defensive banzai attacks, which would result in major casualties on both sides. Lieutenant General Ushijima knew from the start that the annihilation of his army, and quite possibly even himself, were inevitable, yet he kept a mentality that he would still be able to win this battle purely through attrition. His strategy was if he kept sending kamikaze attacks against the invaders, eventually they would start to lose hope in the battle and simply give up. Considering how long the Battle of Okinawa lasted, it can be easily stated that this attempt did not work to stop the American advancement. As the weeks progressed in the battle, the Americans pushed further and further up the front lines, and the Japanese realized they would take more desperate measures to be able to drive them back. We had been unloading cargo, and the boom was still halfway up. A kamikaze pilot hit the wires on the boom before he hit the bridge. If he had hit the bridge, he'd have put us out of commission. Kamikaze planes were a major problem that the Americans had been facing during the duration of the Pacific Theater. These pilots had one purpose when they were inside of their planes, and that was to cause as much collateral damage as possible, and to try and weaken the enemy's morale through the display that they would sacrifice their lives for their cause. Air raids were extremely common during soldiers' time on Okinawa as the days progressed. Starting in April, there was a series of 10 suicide missions by the Japanese Air Force called 10-Go. These attacks went on until June and accounted for over 3,300 American deaths, at least 30 sunken American ships, and 368 ships and crafts damaged. Don Phillips was on the USS Arkansas, an attack cargo ship. We had been unloading cargo, and the boom was still halfway up. Said Phillips, 90. And Phillips, a junior officer on the deck, might have suffered more than just shrapnel wounds and temporary shock. Instead, he and most of the ship were able to carry on, spending 30 days unloading cargo while enduring more than 500 air raids. I had my 21st birthday there, on April 15th. I remember we stayed at General's quarters all day. I don't remember how many air raids we had. Not only did the US forces have to face countless amounts of air raids from the enemy, they also had to endure the elements on the island. Starting on May 21st, there was a 9-day downpour of rain that delivered 11 inches of rain to Okinawa. This rain flooded valleys and roads to the point that not even tracked vehicles could pass through. as well as making it impossible to get any traction in order to walk up any hill or slope surface. As the rain went on, it began to break down all lines for resupply, evacuation, and reinforcement. Eating became difficult, sleeping was impossible, and even sanitation became non-existent, to the point where the men would be constantly surrounded by piles of fly-ridden bodies and piles of filth. Day by day, these men fought a grueling battle that would cost an average of 3,000 lives a day as they pushed their way through the front lines and worked their way to their main objective, the airfields. One soldier remembered making his way through the caves, slowly moving his way up the island in order to complete the mission he was there so long for. The cave opening was less than 3 feet wide, not as tall as a man. We were very quiet, barely whispering. There was no sign of any Japanese, no sound. A crude wooden door was propped against the entrance. We worked as close as we could while trying to hold some cover, and the Chewie called into the cave. No reply. He tried again and again, each time something different. Silence. We assumed the wooden door was booby-trapped, so we tried dropping rocks onto it from above, hoping to knock it over or set off the trap. Nothing happened. We were getting a little bolder. We felt a long, heavy electrical wire, which I tossed at the door, hoping to lasso a corner. It finally caught securely enough for me to pull it over while trying to keep myself more or less defilated behind a rock. No booby trap. At this point in the battle, nearing the completion, the Japanese military were trying to find any way possible to slow down the advancement of the US troops, whether it be booby traps or through kamikaze strikes or banzai missions. Throughout the 3 months of fighting on Okinawa, the Japanese military deployed hundreds upon hundreds of suicide missions, all resulting in devastating losses on both sides, to delay the American military's capturing of the airfields so that the homeland could fortify the southern end of the island in preparation for air raids in the following weeks. These attempts would eventually fail, and Okinawa would finally fall to the United States on June 21st, 1945, after both Ushijima and his second-in-command, Isamu Sho, committed suicide by seppuku in the Japanese headquarters on the island. The resulting losses in this battle could be used to state that this was perhaps the bloodiest and most devastating battle in all of the Pacific Theater. In total, there are estimated to be over 150,000 casualties between the US and Japanese armies. This does not include the estimated 100,000 civilians who were killed in the 87-day invasion of Okinawa. With the conclusion of Operation Iceberg, the US military was finally able to use the airstrips and launch air raids onto the Japanese homeland, and eventually drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This battle was a critical moment in the Pacific Theater as both sides realized that this was the last push that the Americans needed to make it virtually impossible for Japan to win the war.